So I had to find the wet spot. Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, obviously, the most basic, the moist basic concepts. Hegel in the preface. We have to restore force to the most elementary words. That's a quote from Heidegger, but I think that's the spirit of Hegel's preface. So the sign is there for me in a personal way. I have to tune the words. I have to learn to hear the words. And I don't believe in this raw, idiotic sensation and some eternal, pure meaning. I believe in dissemination and historicity. What I'm saying is that when you study philosophy, the meaning of the moist, basic concepts, this meaning evolves for you. You tune in the meaning, the hermeneutic circle. You go round and round, and the meanings, it's like they glow. They begin to glow. The situation becomes more specified. So I think Derrida is great, excuse me, and of grammatology, but he does not focus. At least I think we should focus on the idea of a word in your ear, the blurry equivalence classes. In limited ink, he touches on iterability, so he's a huge influence. But I think focus is ideal here. To me, there's so much detail, so much complexity, so much history. So, to me, as someone who tries to be a philosopher, I feel like you got to zero in what is the essence, what is the most important thing, and what is the angle. What has not already been said, or what has not already been emphasized. It's all been said, perhaps. But what should be emphasized in this moment? Secure the treasure of the essence. What is the essence, the center, the gist? And I write and think in English. I don't read German. So I have to find living words in English. And if you abandon faith in pure meaning, you embrace the poetic task and the poetic risk. Fasching, very cool scholar, he seems to be saying part of what I say, the main point even. Academic, respectable, long-winded, but I don't mean that as an insult. He's supposed to be long-winded to make a detailed case. Now he leans on Advaita Vedanta, and I would connect my view to Advaita Vedanta, but because it is a spiritual tradition, I would prefer to avoid emphasizing that. I don't want, spiritualistic approaches. I'm not talking about Fasching because he is very cautious, but they tend to be sloppy with concepts, and they tend to have their own kind of weird scientism. They just have another approach to monotheistic objective reality. I will say that the main point is right against the mystical. And when Wittgenstein expresses the ontological difference in his words, in the TLP, he even calls it the mystical, or that's how it's translated. But I don't want it taken that way as more soul-saving ointment. Now, yeah, it's against Whitman's radical anti-alienated position. I mean, it's against it in that it's right next to it, not that it's opposed. It's very compatible. But Whitman, he's so in this world, he's so present. So in some sense, Whitman is an anti-mystic, an anti-guru. So I love Whitman. I connect Whitman to Heidegger. Heidegger, he also is long-winded, but that's his job. He has to do that destructive work. That destructive work clears a path for what is simple. So what is simple? And this is a claim that's not going to be understood without the destructive work. It's also just my situated belief. Consciousness is being. I mean, that's it. Or being is presence, is consciousness. But presence is never present. So yeah, I've said that 1,000 times. I do think it's this crucial insight that is very hard to understand. It's too simple, and consciousness is too reified, and we are just too technified. This technified, ideological, monotheistic notion of science as the pursuit of truth. And on the flip side, you have spiritualism that is scientistic in the same way. So I would critique spiritualism for being scientistic, and scientism for being, monotheist. So presence is no thing. Consciousness is not a stuff. So I am not talking about mind. Consciousness is not mind stuff. I'm saying, I won't say the opposite of that. There's a from a point of viewness that's important here, that's captured by the word presence or proximity. But it is the world that is present, the world in its full and terrible transcendence. I'm talking about the boring parts of your life just as much as I am about your exciting trip on shrooms or whatever. Now, the weird thing about the ontological difference, we have to use present entities to say it. So presence is just a word, just a thing. Consciousness, just a word, just a thing. So fundamental ontology, I'm even getting, ambivalent about this phrase. It is the use of things to point beyond them, to point beyond things that are present to the presence of those things. Now, this presence is also time, but not clock time or the time of physics. This is a more primordial time. So this is what Heidegger gives us in his early work. Being and time. Being is presence, is time. So we're talking about dynamic presence, a streaming presencing of world. So a kind of liquid, discordant, ontological perspectivism, a melted version of Leibniz's monadology. But this ontological difference, this is the idiotic core. Idiotic I use as too simple. There's no dazzling math. There's one stupid pointing, and the rest is built on this. So, I know that my ontological perspectivism is against the grain. I think I find it in Sheehan, like in his comments, his response to, I think, Polt, a scholar. I made a video about this. You are the river. Not you as empirical ego who is a present person, but as you look on the river, your consciousness is the being of that physical river from a point of view. So one pointing, one stupid pointing at the ontological difference, at consciousness as presence, and the rest is built on this, but the rest is also a destruction or a critique of the prejudice that consciousness is an internal stuff that emerges from some other kind of truth-making substrate stuff. Indirect realism, truth is correspondence, this ideology that follows behind science. Science does not depend on it, science does not lean on it, but it's a very compatible ideology, ontology, whatever you want to call it. So anti-dualism hacks a path to the possession of consciousness as presence. Now this anti-dualism was already in the logical positivist. So for all of their apparent scientism, they were so faithful, you might say, to the spirit of empiricism. that they could not help but explore phenomenalism. They were so anti-metaphysical that they were critical of the metaphysics that follows behind science without serving as its foundation. But they were a little iffy on this issue. Like A.J. Ayer, he plays with the redundancy theory of truth, but uses a term like verification. A great book that he wrote as a young man, very impressive. But you might say that I want to push logical positivism a little further. And I think that the early work of Heidegger, as weird as this will sound to some, I'm sure, is like first-rate logical positivism. Now, this involves the collapse of faith in objective reality and truth as mirroring of this objective reality. So this is anti-representationalism. Richard Rorty is an influence on me, but he also, he didn't want to emphasize this. He also kind of fooled around, which is fine. There's a foolishness in this too, right? There's the foolishness of the straight line. There's the foolishness of the technical uselessness of this. This is not some pragmatic act on my part. So what happens if we grasp consciousness as being, as presence? And I can only emphasize again that consciousness is not mind stuff. I think maybe people refuse to believe what I'm saying. Consciousness is the presence of the physical, for instance. The presence of things we call physical, the presence of anything and everything. But if you explore this research thesis, you can just view this as a thought experiment if you want. But if you grasp consciousness as presence, you get a genuine phenomenalism. So phenomenalism tends to be misunderstood by the indirect realist who discuss it. And, the early phenomenalist, it's like they didn't emphasize the ontological difference, which is important. But this word phenomenalism, can I resuscitate it? Maybe, maybe not, right? This is my poetic risk, right? It's an out-of-fashion term, misunderstood. I think it's a beautiful word. I think it's a profoundly empirical philosophy. So you might say I'm putting $5 on this horse. And my baby, my artistic offering, my theory, is an immaterialism, right? It's post-matter as truth maker. So matter is in quotes here, right? This can be theo matter or whatever. It can be, the world as God sees it. It can be the obscure substrate stuff of, metaphysical realism. It doesn't matter. The essence of matter is its function as truth maker. This is the wet spot. You can call it matter or God or the physical, whatever name you want to call this unpresent stuff. It's a projection of reality away from what is present. So in that sense, it is alienated, but it's also imperial, in that whoever mediates matter or God or the physical can play a priest-like role. So there are some political implications here, but it's more in the direction of a kind of, you might say, what would be my motive here? Well, my objection to dualism is that it's a very messy, it's a terrible theory, right? I mean, I've critiqued it in other videos. But there's also a kind of Whitmanian impatience with all of this alienation and all of this, empirical science that calls the perceived object unreal, tries to turn the perceived world into mind stuff. So that's why if you think that by consciousness I mean mind stuff, you are radically misunderstanding me. But I can totally understand the temptation to misunderstand me in precisely that direction. Most talk of consciousness, it's mind stuff. I'm equating it to being and presence. This is a weird thing to do. So theomaterialism, that's my playful name for all of this monotheistic projection of a truth-making substrate. And the hoax is in objective. This word. Now there's a mundane, innocent meaning of this word, something like freedom from disqualifying or relevant bias. But this is not how people use it when they wax metaphysical. I think they understand it in a mystified fashion, but this is a dominant mystification, right? So I'm the weirdo to call it out, right? So it's mystified as more than the situated personal judgment of the lack of relevant bias. So what I'm saying is that the mundane, non-mystified use of the word objective is as me judging, like, oh yeah, this juror should be allowed on the jury. I don't see any disqualifying bias. Maybe you do. That's it. Even the judgment of what is objective in the mundane, acceptable sense is still a situated personal judgment. Now this is redundant. Personal, I'm just trying to emphasize, a situated judgment is my own judgment that I'm responsible for, and therefore it's a personal judgment, and I'm articulating my sense of the world when I do that. So the monotonotheism, another playful term, is the derealization of the from a point of view life world. So early Heidegger was about this. I think you can find this kind of stuff in Wittgenstein, Merleau-Ponty. So to me, you might say that I'm a life world realist, but that's probably a confusing phrase. But the life world is the soil from which theory grows. This is the world that we live in. This would be something like our total existence happens within the life world. So I can learn about physics, I can learn about philosophy, I can cook hamburgers, I can walk my dog. All of this happens in the one stream of my existence, in this very rich life world that is qualitatively present to me in terms of things I value and disvalue. And it is funny that, phenomenologists had to invent a term for the world as we live in it. A term for the world as we live in it. Philosophers had to come up with a special word for that. Kind of a Nietzschean point. But we philosophers, the life-hating philosophers, we need this reminder. Life-hating in the sense of a constant flight from our situation as persons here and now. But we long for eternal truth, for the security of correctitude. So, the obsession with epistemology, instead of trying to figure out what we mean by our fundamental terms, right? We rush into a kind of system for adjudicating claims, but we are way too easygoing for my taste about the meaning of the terms in those claims. And this is another thing that I like about the logical positivist, Moritz Slick, the semantic approach. Of course, Wittgenstein did this, but I think all great philosophers have cared about securing the meaning of their fundamental terms. So, but let me say, I do think that, philosophers in general, they hope to offer an enduringly valid articulation of our shared situation, right? They're trying to sketch the essence of what they take to be not only their situation, but also your situation. But if you claim eternal truth, if you claim objective reality, you're sort of cheating, right? You need to talk to people and find out if they can relate to your words, right? So knowledge is this inherently ethical and interpersonal thing. God's point of view doesn't come into it. The substrate doesn't come into it except in an indirect way. When people talk about the substrate, I think there's a kind of alienation in that because they're talking about their sense of the world. And calling your own beliefs true just emphasizes that you believe your beliefs, which is a triviality. Now the trick about, the trick in what I'm offering here is that it points back at singular existence. So it's a minimal approach. It's only as closed as it seems to need to be ontology, this pompous word, as open as possible by the light that is given to me.